After weeks of oppressive, record-breaking heat, a cold front has finally swept across the eastern United States, dropping temperatures and bringing an unusually early taste of fall weather to millions of people desperate for relief after an exhausting stretch of summer. It feels like the crisis is over. Scientists are saying, in no uncertain terms, not so fast. The same climate pattern that produced this summer's brutal heat is still very much in charge, and forecasters warn that this cold front is a pause, not an ending. Let's start with exactly what just happened, because the relief itself is real and significant for the millions of people who lived through weeks of dangerous, oppressive conditions. According to the latest forecast model guidance, a strong weather pattern sent significantly cooler air down from Canada into the central and eastern United States, bringing what forecasters are calling an unusually early taste of fall weather to regions that would typically still be deep in the heart of summer heat during the middle of August. This follows a summer that has already proven genuinely dangerous for millions of people across the country. As of early August, the 2026 North American heat wave has been attributed to at least 70 deaths, with the extreme conditions coinciding with major public events, forcing outdoor gatherings to take extended shade and hydration breaks just to keep participants safe from the worst of it. Cities from Philadelphia to Washington to New York saw temperatures climb into the low 90s during the peak of the heat, with several locations challenging or breaking daily record highs entirely during what turned into one of the more punishing stretches of summer weather in recent memory. Here is why scientists are urging caution rather than celebration. Now that cooler air has finally arrived across so much of the eastern half of the country. This cold front did not appear out of nowhere, and it is not evidence that the underlying weather pattern driving the summer's extremes has broken. Back on June 11th, the National Weather Service confirmed that El Niño conditions were present across the tropical Pacific, with forecasters warning at the time about the possibility of a full Super El Niño developing. As the year went on, that warning has since proven accurate. Climate scientists have been clear that El Niño conditions, combined with the ongoing influence of human-caused climate change, directly increase both the frequency and the severity of heat waves, like the one that just ended. And El Niño does not simply disappear because one cold front pushed through the eastern half of the country for a few days. Before we go further into exactly what scientists expect this pattern to do next, if breaking developments in weather and climate are exactly what you come here for, do yourself a favor and hit like and subscribe. Because we track patterns like this one as they continue to unfold. So why exactly should this cold front be treated as temporary rather than a sign that the dangerous pattern has broken for good? The answer comes down to how a Super El Niño actually behaves once it takes hold of the atmosphere and starts steering conditions across an entire continent, current ocean. Analysis confirms this. El Niño is not simply persisting, it is actively strengthening week after week, and forecasters are projecting that it will trigger what meteorologists call an amplified split flow pattern, moving from late summer into fall and especially into winter. A split flow pattern occurs when the jet stream effectively divides into two separate branches. One branch steering cooler air and storms into certain regions, while an entirely different set of conditions holds steady across other parts of the country simultaneously. That is exactly the kind of pattern responsible for producing a sudden, sharp cold front in 1 week, followed potentially by a return of dangerous heat and dryness in the weeks that follow, all within the same overarching climate signal. This regional whiplash is already showing up clearly in current forecasts across multiple parts of the country simultaneously. Much of the plains and Midwest are expected to experience below-average rainfall this month, setting up dangerous heat and dryness across the central United States, even as the Northeast deals with a more active, stormier pattern, bringing repeated rounds of thunderstorms and this welcome stretch of cooler air. Texas, Oklahoma, and parts of Kansas in particular continue showing well below average rainfall in the latest model guidance, even as this cold front delivers real relief hundreds of miles away across the eastern half of the country. That kind of sharply divided weather picture, cool and stormy in one region, while hot and dry conditions persist or threaten to return, is another is precisely the signature of a Super El Niño reorganizing the entire continent's weather pattern, not resolving it once and for all. There is also a longer-term reason scientists are urging caution, one that extends well beyond the next few weeks, and into the rest of this year entirely. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center has already released an updated seasonal outlook covering December 2026 through February 2027, and it reveals a winter shaped directly by the same strengthening El Niño. Much of the northern United States is favored to experience warmer than normal conditions this coming winter, while the southern United States carries a stronger signal for above normal precipitation, according to the latest available seasonal projections. That is not the profile of a climate pattern that is fading into the background. It is the profile of one that is expected to keep amplifying for months to come, meaning the temporary relief delivered by this week's cold front says very little about what conditions will look like even a few weeks from now, let alone by the time winter finally arrives. It is also worth understanding the physical mechanism connecting a warm patch of ocean water thousands of miles away in the tropical Pacific to a cold front dropping down from Canada into the eastern United States, because that connection is exactly why scientists can speak with real confidence about this pattern continuing to shift and amplify in the weeks ahead. During a strong El Niño, unusually warm water in the tropical Pacific disrupts the normal pattern of rising. In sinking air across that region, and because the atmosphere behaves as a single connected system, that disruption ripples outward through chains of cause and effect that scientists call teleconnections, ultimately reshaping the position and behavior of the jet stream over North America. That same mechanism can just as easily send a burst of cooler air southward one week as it can set up a ridge of dangerous heat the very next, which is exactly why meteorologists describe this kind of pattern as volatile and prone to sharp, sudden swings rather than a steady, predictable trend moving in one single direction. Historical comparisons back up exactly this kind of behavior. Previous major heat waves across the United States have followed an almost identical script: oppressive heat, building for days or weeks, followed by a cold front finally delivering relief, only for conditions to shift again as the underlying pattern continued evolving. In one previous major heat event, forecasters described a dangerous heat wave enveloping the region from the Midwestern plains to the Atlantic coast, breaking records in a handful of states before the National Weather Service confirmed the high temperatures would finally break as a cold front dropped southward, though the agency simultaneously warned that severe weather, including heavy rainfall and flash flood risk, would continue right alongside that relief. That same tension, celebrating the end of dangerous heat while bracing for whatever unstable weather the transition itself brings, has repeated across nearly every major heat wave in recent memory. In this year's version, layered on top of an unusually strong El Niño, appears to be following the same fundamental pattern on an even larger scale. What makes this year different is the sheer strength of the El Niño driving the pattern, a strength that scientists say increases the odds of exactly this kind of dramatic back and forth, rather than a single clean transition from summer heat into a mild, stable fall. Forecasters monitoring conditions week to week have been candid that predicting the exact timing and severity of the next swing, whether that means a return of dangerous heat, a burst of severe storms, or an extended stretch of the current cooler pattern, remains genuinely difficult, even with sophisticated modern forecasting tools. Precisely because a super El Niño tends to produce these kinds of sharp, sometimes counterintuitive regional contrasts, rather than a single, easily predictable national trend. For the millions of people currently enjoying a welcome break from weeks of dangerous heat, the message from meteorologists is not meant to dampen genuine relief after a summer that has already proven deadly. It is meant to prevent a false sense that the underlying risk has passed entirely. Emergency planners, agricultural forecasters, and energy providers are all being advised to treat this cooler stretch as a pause within an active, still developing climate pattern, rather than as the definitive end of the season's extreme weather risk. It also helps to understand why this particular El Niño has earned the label super in the first place. Since not every El Niño event carries the same intensity or the same downstream consequences, some years bring only a mild, barely noticeable warming of the tropical Pacific, producing correspondingly subtle shifts in North American weather that most people never even notice. A super El Niño represents the far end of that intensity spectrum, a warming episode strong enough to produce the kind of sharp, unmistakable swings currently playing out across the country, from record heat and dozens of deaths in July to an early arrival of fall-like conditions barely a month later. The most recent El Niño events, strong enough to meaningfully reshape American weather, occurred during the winters of 2018 into 2019, and again in 2023 into 2024, giving forecasters a useful point of comparison for understanding just how disruptive a pattern of this strength has historically proven to be. There is also a practical dimension to why officials are treating this cold front so cautiously rather than declaring the danger over. Heat-related deaths and illnesses often continue accumulating even after temperatures begin to fall, since the cumulative physical toll of extended heat exposure does not simply reverse the moment cooler air arrives. Public health officials monitoring this summer's heat wave have cautioned that final death tolls from extreme heat events frequently continue rising for days or even weeks after the immediate emergency appears to have passed, as delayed health complications and heat-related medical episodes continue surfacing in the aftermath. That lag is part of why treating a cold front as an all-clear signal, rather than simply a temporary reprieve, can carry real consequences beyond just weather planning. Agricultural interests across the country are watching this pattern with particular concern, since the same El Nino driving this back and forth swing between heat and cooler relief is also directly responsible for the uneven drought conditions currently developing across the plains and Midwest. Crops in regions experiencing below average rainfall this month face mounting stress regardless of how comfortable the air temperature feels on any given day, meaning a pleasant, cool week. In the eastern United States can coincide with worsening agricultural conditions unfolding simultaneously just a few hundred miles away. That kind of disconnect between how a pattern feels on the ground in one region versus what it is actually doing to farmland, water supplies, and energy demand elsewhere is exactly the complexity scientists are trying to communicate clearly as this super El Nino continues evolving through the remainder of the year. Given how quickly conditions have already swung from record heat to an early taste of fall this month alone, scientists say the responsible approach is watching how this super El Nino continues to evolve day by day, rather than assuming the most dangerous chapter of this year's weather has already been written. If you want to stay ahead of major weather and climate developments before they reshape your forecast, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel, because we will keep tracking this pattern as it continues to develop in the weeks and months ahead, through whatever comes after this brief stretch of cooler air.